And I think one of the stories that hasn't been told is really how hard Black people fought for education, even during slavery. That I was telling you backstage that the first book that I sold, which I haven't published yet because Rashad was talking about how he's late on his book. And I was saying it's very normal to be late on a book, I've learned, was really about this centuries-long quest for Black Americans to get a quality education. And we know Black people were the only people in the history of America for whom it was ever illegal to learn to read and write. Yeah. We were legally prohibited from having literacy. Books were considered contraband. And yet, all throughout slavery, you have these stories of Black people who would sneak out into the woods and the forest on Sundays, their one day off, and hold schools. They would dig pits where they could go down and not be seen. Of Black people smuggling. Back in the 1800s, Webster, who wrote the dictionary, had what was called a Blue Book Primer. And the Blue Book Primer was a way that you could teach yourself to read even if you didn't have formal education. And so Black folks would put together, do something to get 10 cents or 15 cents so they could buy this Blue Book Primer, teach themselves to read, hiding it under their hats or under their pieces of clothes, and then passing it on to other people to learn to read. And there was just this constant effort to gain literacy, to gain knowledge. And after slavery, you had many white missionary groups and including also the Freedmen's Bureau, who thought they were going to come down south and teach Black people the value of education and start schools. And when they came down south, they found that Black people had already started their own schools, that they were already beginning to educate themselves, that you would find even the 80-year-old who's coming from the field and saying, I want to learn to read my Bible, and sitting next to the 5-year-old in these schools that Black people were building. And so the first institutions that Black people built out of slavery are churches and schools. And these are people with no money, no resources, and the little money they have, they're building churches and schools. And the public school in the South is largely created by Black people. Public education did not exist in the South during slavery. Even poor white children didn't have access to public schools. But Black people who have been liberated from slavery, the first things they push for are public schools to serve all children. So that's a story I wish was told more, especially considering one of the most nefarious stereotypes of Black people is that somehow we're the only people in the history of the world who don't value education, who don't value learning, and it simply defies everything we know historically.